You know, back in the day, wasn't it interesting how computers used to say my computer, and now they all say this PC? Aside from a cute little meme, ladies and gentlemen, this is a pretty serious topic that, I have talked about for the last few months, and I think that the content that I've made has kind of really been centered around all of these various factors leading into your computer basically being dead, ladies and gentlemen. It's pretty much done and over with. Why? Well, with how expensive things have gotten, it seems like there's a conspiracy that people have been raising up. Do these big companies want you to not own computers anymore? So you remember back when we looked at Jeff Bezos, who was like, I think the future of computers is kind of in the cloud. There's this whole meme about subscription-based billing apparently being a whole thing. When did personal computer become subscription-based computer? Well, we live in a day and age, ladies and gentlemen, where people talk about renting computers. Now, you guys remember that company NZXT? Well, I love how, instead of dealing with the pre-built gaming solutions, there are PC subscriptions anybody can go get access to. You can go down over here, pick a flex computer all the way from the shitty end to the highest end. And of course, when you go high to the very top, you're expected to pay around $279 a month for a computer that you don't even own. It's a fucking mentally insane situation. I'm glad to say that in every respect, it's not all the way there. There's places like Omen Gaming, where you remember when we looked at it last time, like probably a couple months ago? Yeah, thankfully that service is ending. And I like to think it's ending because people are waking up to the fact that these subscriptions are nothing more than incredibly hyper-predatory. I want to say focusing on people that are towards the more poverty end, right? People that obviously don't have the money to go out and buy a fucking computer, right? Even computer prices are so goddamn fucked these days that, when you go to any of these like websites and you try to purchase like a pre-built computer, you look at a computer and it's like $1,500. Back when I was starting this channel recording like creepypasta gaming footages, I started on the crap top. I then bought a little computer that was probably around $600, around $650, and this is a $1,500 computer. Now you might be like, wow, for $1,500, it's probably great. It's even on sale. So you look into this computer, ladies and gentlemen, and lo and behold, aside from the actual GPU being a 9060 XT, which is fairly decent, you're looking at about 16 gigs of RAM, which is slowly phasing its way out, a Ryzen 7 5700, which honestly is going to show its age pretty quickly, in the next couple years. So when you look at this computer, you look at the memory and it's like, damn, DDR4? Damn, we're running a AM4 platform? Holy shit, this computer might be already to its grave in a matter of a few years when things start to outstrip its benefits, right? But can you really blame the pre-built gaming companies when you actually look at the price for how expensive RAM sticks have gotten? 32 gigabytes of actual DDR5 memory, that's, yes, 6,000 megahertz, is around $789. It's why every company you look at, all the way from the smallest companies to, by the way, the largest indie phone companies, you might have heard of Apple, basically going out and saying, hey guys, listen, prices are unavoidable. We're doing our best to mitigate the huge increases that are being passed to us. And we've been trying to shield our customers from the increases, but the situation has become unsustainable. Again, a lot of this is due to the big AI bros effectively taking all of the compute and putting it into data centers around the country, around the world, and kind of taking away the ownership that we have as the average person for our own computers, When did your computer just become this fucking PC, right? This isn't a profound take that I'm offering. This is something that many people have been calling out for months now. And it seems like, the faster we wake up to it, the faster we actually acknowledge it, the quicker we can start to proceed and stop this madness that we're headed down. I was going to give Apple some credit, but to give you an idea, they've also jumped down the pipeline of artificial intelligences, but thankfully in this case, they've kind of aimed it in a direction where it's more respectable to the user. See, when you purchase a new shiny Pro Max iPhone, it's probably got enough RAM to actually run a local model, which is kind of what Apple's been doing in many cases on their devices. Staggeringly, a weird big tech move where I've I've seen them actually use people's privacy as a selling point and allow you to run some of these models on your system as opposed to, again, reaching out to the cloud and giving up your information that way. It's just crazy that you need the most expensive fucking iPhone to actually do this, right? You need like one of the most expensive devices to actually get away with doing it. But that's just kind of how this technology works, you know what I mean? You know, back when I was younger, I always felt that like computer literacy was at its like all-time kind of high. You know, when I was younger, back in like the early 2000s, one of the coolest things about using a computer was finding ways to get stuff for free. Now, I'm not advocating piracy in this video. Piracy is very wrong, but I realized lately in the years that I've kind of seen the rise of subscription mania that piracy is one of those few things that we can do as a human being to preserve the media that we love and enjoy, to preserve basic access to the internet. I'll give you a quick example of how I actually kind of like see piracy as a good thing. For instance, when you go to Netflix, one of those services where things constantly float in or out. Now, Netflix is a service that has been getting expensive as the years have gone on, right? Inflation hits everything, ladies and gentlemen. Sonic the Hedgehog, all the way to your favorite fucking media services. So on Netflix, one of my favorite movies is Heat. I actually think it's one of the best heist movies ever. You see that little strip underneath the fucking movie, leaving soon? This is my issue with subscription services. The prices go up, things constantly float in or out. So I'm at this point in my life where I pretty much say fuck Netflix, fuck Amazon Prime Video, fuck Apple TV, fuck whatever other subscription services that are out there. Bundled together, I realize that I'm probably paying more money for all these services combined if I choose to buy them than the fucking cable TV we used to complain about. Back in the day, if you wanted to get the movie channels with your cable, you had to buy the packages separately. What's really all that different now? It's the same shit, except now we just pick which streaming services to bundle up. And here's the best pro tip out of it. Some of these streaming services have even reintroduced advertisements. You know, one of the things we wanted to get away from, that's suddenly there. The enshittification of the internet really just prevails 24/7, 365. Some things are just destined to repeat. So, see, instead of all this, ladies and gentlemen, I discovered something known as Jellyfin. Now, Jellyfin is a beautiful free software that you can install, run in a Docker container on your home computer or your own server. And in this case, I decided to run it on my own server. So here you can see that on my own local IP address, I now have access to a whole litany of movies. So let's say I wanted to watch something like, I don't know, Pearl Harbor from 2001. Not my choice, by the way. My dad was the one that preferred this. I can easily go to the internet and, just using my Heat example, purchase the DVD for like $8.95, bring it home, rip it onto my computer using a DVD player or a DVD like drive, and then I can copy that MP4 file or whatever the fuck I encoded it into in this solution, and boom, I can actually just hit play. You know, instead of hoping that your your movie streaming service has Rush Hour and Rush Hour 2 available, you can just rip these once legally, make your backups, and then just watch it for yourself. And the best part about it is, anywhere that I'm at in the world, I don't need to worry about spinning up a fucking VPN. I can just expose this to the internet and watch this on my goddamn cell phone or tablet or laptop anywhere. It's really a fucking insane situation to see, right? It's basically taking back ownership of your media. You know, back when I was younger, one of the cool things about like gaming was the ability to actually preserve your video games. You know, things like emulators, for instance, exist in the sense that instead of going to a lot of these services and paying arm and a leg, basically having your blood be sucked dry month by month and being able to play some of your older classic games, usually at higher resolutions, maybe with third-party achievements, maybe with better patches and whatnot than the official guys can provide, is something that I don't really take for granted. A lot of my favorite gaming, a lot of the games that I missed out on, I've finally been able to re-experience or actually see what they were all about, not by buying somebody's overexpensive dying hardware and some disc on eBay that's priced way too high. I can just emulate it on my local system. I can just put them all on a hard drive and share them all over my home for many other people in my house to emulate and play stuff underneath, right? What a novel fucking concept. You know, one of the things that really fucks with me about this is like the amount of people that have kind of accepted the fact that the next computer will be a subscription. And some people have just kind of like looked at this and thought, maybe that's okay. Maybe it's fine. See, the world of cloud computing has sort of become this new thing. Not really new. You know, going back to like the world of PC gaming and the world of like cloud computing, right now we actually get to own our hardware and own our compute. But the reality of it is that companies like Nvidia have found great ways, not really recently, but a lot of these companies have found cute ways to kind of move people to like, GeForce Now or a lot of these cloud services. When you look at the prices, it gets pretty fucking insane. For instance, on a 12-month plan, for 12 months, you can pay around $181, and that may not seem like such a bad deal when you start to like look at the monthly cost. Like some people could justify $26, but they get access to, again, 8-hour gaming sessions, which I think is probably higher than the average person is going to get. 5K resolution, 360 frames per second, first priority access, and probably get access to, ray tracing and the highest end stuff. And while that's super duper cool, ultimately what I don't like about this cloud computing world we're kind of headed into, where a lot of these subscriptions are being introduced, is that what happens when you don't ever actually own not just the hardware, but the software underneath it? The big thing about computers is being able to preserve old video games, and one of the games that I really enjoy seeing preserved are old MMOs that I once enjoyed as a kid. Games like Drift City, for instance, which typically would have been lost media if it wasn't for the fact that the community surrounding it ended up getting the game files and reverse engineering the game back to life. Even if like 30, 40 people play that game, the fact that it's still alive is better than it being complete lost media. It's one of the reasons why I talk about things like stop killing games, because to me, movements like that are important. I'm not somebody that talks about owning your stuff and self-hosting for no reason. I really think that we lose as a society when everything is locked behind paywalls and subscriptions, and ultimately behind those subscriptions lies the media and the software that we have grown used to suddenly locked away. At any moment, if we accept this world, all of a sudden these scumbags get to decide when the fuck you get to use a piece of software and if you even get to use this piece of software. It's one of the reasons why live service games are such a headache, right? Because at the end of the day, it is another form of planned obsolescence, where at the end of the day, you're gonna lose access to something, so these corporations can just sell you the next sequel, and you don't really have a choice. You might enjoy that certain game, you might enjoy that certain product, but without a subscription, if you can't own the software, well, it's pretty much done and dusted now, is it? Nothing better screams to me about this than like Adobe, where like, if you ever looked at the people who have like, you have to be such a scum company when the US FTC has went after you, legally speaking, when it comes to how your cancellation plans work, right? For instance, in this lawsuit between the United States, yes, the US government, and Adobe, they literally do mention, for years, Adobe has harmed consumers by enrolling them in its default, most lucrative subscription plans, without clearly disclosing important plan terms. Adobe fails to adequately disclose to consumers that by signing up for the annual, paid monthly subscription plan, that they are agreeing to a year-long commitment and a hefty early termination fee. So just imagine this for a second, right? All those people that complain about Adobe shit, a lot of these people buy a plan that, they think they're basically paying monthly for, but really they've basically signed a year contract. So when somebody realizes, shit, I don't want to pay like $60, right? Like per month or whatever the hell it is. They start hitting the cancel button, and lo and behold, they're fucking giving hundreds of dollars in cancellation fees for a software that they don't even want to fucking use anymore. And the funniest thing about it too, I've seen people suck cock and explain that subscription software means you get access to the latest and greatest shit, all without ever worrying. Now, there are companies like Apple which have recently introduced a subscription service. And while I don't care about the service, they at least offer their editing software and all the software they have as one-time purchases. Adobe, you could have bought at one point, and I actually did have one of these back in the day for like $800. I considered it sort of like a business expense here, and at the end of the day, I could have just used this one software for a few years, and I actually kind of did. Of course, till down the road when maybe you considered upgrading to be the option. If I could just keep buying Premiere every few years, I'd probably stick to that. But not Adobe. They want you to be locked into that sub fee and constantly fucking drain your account. I probably, if I'm not mistaken, have spent more money in subscriptions than if I just bought whatever I needed at certain points in my life, okay? But that's not how these companies work now, okay? That's the fucking future. It's all subscriptions, and it's all you not owning your shit. It's all you basically renting stuff for perpetuity. That's pretty much where we're at in society, and I don't think that shit's okay. You know, it's been this discussion since like December 2025 where the industry kept shoving cloud gaming down people's throats, right? Where eventually this technology got effectively good enough to serviceably work with a lot of games, right? Nowadays, if you play something like GeForce Now or even Xbox Cloud Streaming, and I have tried both services, the experience isn't the worst thing in the world. Provided you have a fast enough internet connection, I think you can do some pretty decent gaming. Like, you could probably play something like Crimson Desert on NVIDIA Cloud Gaming. Now, if you want to play something like Rainbow Six Siege or maybe any competitive shooter, probably not the best idea to go down because of things like input latency, but you get the idea. That being said, if this becomes a de facto trend in the industry, where because you can't afford a GPU or a computer in general, well, maybe you should be comfortable with just renting something per month for $25, $30. I've talked to people where they literally said this is better than a gaming computer because they're only paying like $30 a month to get access, and they can use it in front of the shittiest computer they can. But here's the thing, what happens when the shittiest computer that you own isn't even capable of doing anything but connecting to the cloud and using software that these scumbags walk behind internet paywalls, right? That's the future that I want to talk about. That's the future that I advocate against. You know, to tie things up with this, like one of the reasons I've been talking about shit like age verification laws and, you know, a lot of these things being introduced into the operating system is down the road in the future. We talked about this like a week ago, where individuals who had Graphene OS on their device trying to do age verification with a program called Yoti ended up actually getting their shit rejected. And later, those people found out I was reported to the police. They were reported to the cops for having access to a privacy-focused operating system. Could you imagine in the future if you're browsing the internet doing something that keeps rejecting you, and then you find out later, oh shit, I was on Linux, I was on something that was basically not capturing everything that I was doing and sending it to a tech company in America. Imagine if you were fucking reported to the cops for that kind of shit. When I switched over to Linux, it wasn't because, you know, I wanted to be some fucking counterculture tech vegan. No, obviously I knew switching to Linux wasn't the best option. It was rough at first. There were moments where I got really used to having a virtual machine that I could spin up anytime to play video games or do work in. And those first 2 years of Linux, you bet I spun that VM up like crazy. I was basically using Windows underneath Linux. Some could even question what was the point other than making it hyper, complicated. But the reality of it is when I built my computer, I didn't want Windows or I didn't want any company to just have access to my computer. My computer belongs to me. It's my computer, not just this PC. And so that's why I switched to like Linux all the way back then. And I got used to it as the gaming got better, the software support started getting better, and overall, installing and maintaining a Linux system actually got easier to do than just running a Windows system outright. And that's the reality. That's the future that I kind of advocate for, man. Like, anytime I talk about the age verification stuff and you not owning your stuff, it's all because it just ties in together. You know, we're in subscription mania where every piece of music, every movie, every game we want to enjoy is locked behind a service run by whatever flavor tech company you feel comfortable with paying. You know, anytime you look at the internet and how free it was, the fact that a lot of these governments are now pushing for the fact that they want to lock access to social media sites or lock access to really any site with draconian vague laws is something anybody should watch out for. You don't want to give up your ID to access parts of the internet, right? And especially when it comes to the whole protecting kids side, I just say you should probably parent a little bit better. But that's nor here nor there. The reality is, look, going into the future, computers are in this kind of weird scenario, right? Like, if you look at some of these interesting laws regarding like Android devices and iOS devices where people use this really shit term called sideloading, which I fucking hate. Because sideloading is basically just installing a third-party application to your system. You might as well say every time you install Steam and download a game through there, you're sideloading something. No, that's not good terminology. That's a language of the fucking enemy, ladies and gentlemen. That's how the enemy motherfucking speaks. That's how they convince you into... That's how they gaslight you into thinking this shit is okay. You know, iPhones and Android devices weren't the first smartphones, but they were the first popular smartphones that I would say. And typically when these dropped, like the iPhone, Apple wanted you to initially download apps only approved by them in their store. And when it came out, people found so many different jailbreaks to install things like Cydia, where you could install your own applications that Apple didn't get a say on. And that was good. Remember, you bought the iPhone. It belonged to you. It didn't belong to Apple. You should be allowed to do whatever the hell you wanted. When Android dropped, you were allowed to install whatever application you wanted. It was true fucking freedom. And unfortunately, companies like Google want to take away that freedom because they want to make you safe on the internet. Imagine now getting an Android device and being told the moment you get it, you have to have a 24-hour waiting period before you can install whatever the hell you want. All because Google thinks it's how they keep the world safe, when in reality it's just adding extra barriers to the control you have. Computers are a bit different. No matter what you have, no matter how governments and people shape it, computers have been this thing since forever at this point, since before I was born. And at that point, you know, I grew up in an age where anybody could share any exe file around and do whatever the hell they wanted on their computer. Nowadays, I think the governments of the world and a lot of these tech companies are totally okay with conditioning people into thinking that it's not your computer. It's just a piece of hardware that you use to connect to our services, and we control every single thing that you do. We control what you consume, we control what you're allowed to consume, and we can take away things at any point that we want. That's the ultimate goal for these companies. If they could just dictate and control what you're allowed to do, they can sell you whatever you want, and you really don't have a say in it. You know, it's one of the reasons why, like, have you ever noticed in, like, cyberpunk movies or, like, anything similar to that, the people who live in the fringe outskirts of society away from the system are usually using, like, old duct tape tech together? It's probably the reason why. It's because the new shit in that universe is so tightly controlled and so vanilla that the people's ownership of the stuff that they were used to is all but eroded. Now you ask yourself, do you want to live in a world, in a society that dictates exactly what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to? No. Nobody should, man. It shouldn't be this PC. It should be your fucking computer, right? So moral of the story, ladies and gentlemen, wake up a little bit, you know? Understand the situation and get a little bit more involved, right? Look, I would love to just go. I would love to just focus on the positives and bright sides of every single thing in life. I've done that for a while, like put my head in the sand. But the reality of it is that you can keep doing that right now. But the thing is, it doesn't lead to anything productive, right? Like at the end of the day, these guys are still making their scumbag moves in the background, right? Like you can ignore every bit of mass surveillance around the world, and that's fine, okay, if you want to live in bliss and in ignorance. But these scumbags that are actually making the moves in the background, they don't stop, okay? They love that fucking complacency, dude. If it was up to them, it'd be over in a heartbeat. But you got to keep up the fight. And even if that fight involves giving up some of the small little software luxuries, you know, imagine that fight literally just involves in you cutting off your subscriptions to things like fucking Apple Music, Google Music, YouTube, Spotify, and just learning to rip your own music and store it on your own systems and self-host your own versions of Spotify, self-host your own video sharing services like Netflix, and just run your own fucking media, because it's really not difficult to put an MP4 file into a folder and let the system auto-run a script and just make it look nice and clean. You know, there's nothing wrong with emulating your video games or actually like learning how to like install older titles onto like virtual machines or making them run underneath like Linux so that you can play older games without constantly being sold re-releases that usually have content removed. And at the end of the day, when it comes to your computer, you know, I'm not going to say install Linux. I leave that decision up to you. But there's a reason I switched years ago. And there's a reason I'm happier with that switch. is because ever since I did that, ever since I got into this mentality, it doesn't matter what these scumbags keep doing. I'll always keep fighting, and I'll always have access to the stuff that I cherish the most. And the best part about it is these scumbag companies couldn't even offer me an incentive to go back. Because generally speaking, even the self-hosted shit that I have is usually on par, if not better, than whatever these people are offering. So get into the habit of running your own shit. Get into the habit of just learning it, you know? You might even have to at some point learn how to make your own VPN. And I'll probably teach you how to do that too. But if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out.